Hi, welcome to CinemaSpection. I'm Tim.
I'm Corinne.
And I'm Shana.
And for this episode, we're opening a very special Christmas present that has warmed the heart and given nightmares to children for over 30 years. We're discussing Gremlins from 1984.
There is a creature unlike anything you've ever seen before. But a word of warning. Never get him wet. Keep him out of bright light, especially sunlight. It'll kill him. But the most important thing, the thing you must never forget, no matter how much he cries, no matter how much he begs, never feed him after midnight. Steven Spielberg will introduce you to Gremlins.
Billy Peltzer has received a strange but adorable Christmas present in the form of Gizmo, a cuddly creature known as a mogwai. But with this new pet comes 3 ominous rules. Keep them out of the light, never get them wet, and never feed them after midnight. But before long, the rules are broken, spawning hordes of gremlins, malevolent creatures that wreak havoc on Billy's hometown of Kingston Falls. With the help of Gizmo and his co-worker Kate, Billy must figure out a way to defeat the menacing pests before they overrun the town. As usual, we'll be discussing Gremlins in detail, so if you haven't seen the movie and wish to remain unspoiled, we recommend watching the film before listening to the rest of this episode. Gremlins was released by Warner Brothers on June 8th, 1984, the same day as Ghostbusters. What a summer that was. It was shot on a budget of $11 million and made $153 million at the box office. The film won Saturn Awards for Best Horror Film, Best Director for Joe Dante, Best Supporting Actress for Polly Holliday, Best Music for Jerry Goldsmith, and Best Special Effects. So, what's everybody's first experiences with Gremlins?
This movie came out when I was 5, so by the time I saw it, I must have been 6 years old. I don't remember my first experience with this movie. I can guarantee I saw it when I was 6, but I don't remember.
Shana?
For me, I might have been a few years older, and I don't have any clear memories of watching the movie, only remembering just how cute Gizmo is. I mean, who doesn't fall in love with Gizmo? I mean, those big eyes and the singing, and then comes the darker moments, which we'll talk about later, but those are my first memories, so...
I remember when this came out not getting to see it for a while and hearing stories from my mother about how gruesome it was. The Gremlin the blender, the Gremlin the microwave. And it's funny because I was a kid who was terrified of any kind of horror movie, and yet this one I really wanted to see. And when I saw it, I didn't have any problems with it. I didn't have nightmares or anything.
So your filmatic memory always fascinates me because you're a year older than I am. You were 6?
I was 6.
I don't remember basically anything from 6 years old, and you're like, yes, I remember hearing about this movie, and I don't know what I was doing at 6. I was being 6.
I remember the movie theater I saw it at. It was the Warwick in Marblehead. It was the first movie we saw there.
Wow.
We need to study that brain.
And no, we don't. Yeah, well, that's the thing. If you ask me anything about history or sports or, anything involved in my family history, just nothing. But ridiculous trivia like that sticks in there. But it's really hard to analyze this movie and separate from my childhood because it just feels like it is just merged together with all my childhood memories. Gremlins was such an important movie for me. It is one of my favorite movies. And anytime I think back on that period in the 80s, just Gremlins is there. If I hear music from that period, I think of Gremlins. I mean, I look in my toy shelf and I still have a couple of the original Gremlins figures, so...
I like how you say toy shelf, like it's singular.
Shh! Don't paint them a picture.
So many shelves.
So let's talk a little bit about that. This movie was kind of a weird sell, and it was very controversial for the fact that it was originally marketed like a cute Steven Spielberg movie. People were expecting E.T. again, and they show up, and there's these nasty little creatures and people getting killed and violence and all sorts of weird, scary stuff. And it was a problem for a lot of people. I mean, this is one of the 2 movies that led to the creation of the PG-13, this and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Do you guys have any memories of that kind of reaction to it?
Not at all. I do remember feeling a little confusion that a movie with snow would come out in the summer.
Yeah, apparently it was intended to be a Christmas movie, and Warner Brothers realized they didn't have a summer movie to compete with Ghostbusters and Temple of Doom, so they sort of rushed this into production to be out in time for summer, because if it had come out in December, I think there wouldn't have even been any debate about whether this was a Christmas movie or not. But it also might not have done as well. As Joe Dante commented, Christmas movie, it comes out before Christmas. After Christmas, nobody wants to see a Christmas movie. And releasing it in the middle of the summer, Ghostbusters was like number 1 and Gremlins was 2 for about a month and a half. It didn't move. It just kept making the same amount of money. It was such a steady hit. But it's weird to me that I've talked to a lot of people of that generation that I grew up with who were terrified by this film and almost like a phobia. They couldn't watch it. And to me, it's all just hilarious and fun. There's nothing in here. Even the startling moments never really got to me the way they would in some other movies. For some reason, I don't know if it's the fact that the ads didn't show the creatures, and me being a monster fan, I was all about, I want to see what these creatures look like. And so when they finally showed up, I'm like, oh, cool, it's cool looking, I like it. And so it didn't have that, oh my God, I'm too scared of it, I can't look at it factor for me. How about you, Shana? I mean, were you ever terrified by this one when it came out?
For me, honestly, is based on my memories, is I only remember the good parts, the warm, fuzzy parts. And, maybe it was my brain just kind of wanting to stick to the good and maybe deny, the darker moments. And as we watched it this evening, it was interesting how my mind at this age really kind of processed it. And I was much more open to the dichotomy of good and bad and how I really kind of thought about it. But for my earlier memories, I just remember the cuteness. I never really thought about what we would now call like the more horror movie side. So
wait, you don't get any warm fuzzies from the camaraderie of the Gremlins drinking together and going to the movies and having fun? I think it's sweet.
Interesting? Fun? Cute? No, not cute. No.
I never felt any fear from the Gremlins once, the mogwai become Gremlins, but putting a gremlin in the microwave until it explodes,
yeah,
that has always and still is just too much for me. I'm not okay with that.
It's funny, because I was 6 years old and still believed in Santa Claus, the only things that actually did horrify me in the movie were the Gremlins attacking Santa and Phoebe Cates' story about what happened to her dad.
Oh, that as well. Oh my God. So I still think of this as a family-friendly film. I would absolutely show this to any one of my nieces or nephews, regardless of their age. But that story dropped right into the middle of it.
Firemen came and broke through the chimney top, and me and Mom were expecting them to pull out a dead cat or a bird, and instead they pulled out my father. He was dressed in a Santa Claus suit. He'd been climbing down the chimney on Christmas Eve, his arms loaded with presents. He was going to surprise us. He slipped and broke his neck, died instantly. And that's how I found out there was no Santa Claus.
That horrible mini horror story. And this is something that I really love about certain films, and it happens a lot in children's movies. There'll be just dropped in the middle a little encapsulated horror film. And this happened in The Little Mermaid, the Sebastian with the chef, where there's this little horror film and it's over and you move on and the rest of the movie goes.
I can think of Return to Oz, the whole thing with the heads.
Exactly.
That's a little creepy mini movie in there.
Exactly. It's this horror encapsulation, and then the main story just keeps going.
I have had an issue where, like, I recommended to my brother to show his kids, and I realized, oh, that scene, when you get to about an hour and 10, just skip to the next chapter on the DVD. That might be a good idea. And I had to remind him that. He's like, yeah, I think we're going to wait a little while.
The darkest moment for me was when the professor was found under the desk and there was a needle in his leg. I was like, oh, I think for me, if I were younger and I were to watch that one would probably give me nightmares. Because that was payback for what had happened, premeditated, purposeful. And it was the closest thing to murder that was in that movie. And so that was, for me, the darkest moment.
It would have been a lot worse originally. Apparently, they shot it with the science teacher having needles stuck all over his face.
Ooh.
And I don't know if it was Spielberg or Warner Brothers said, let's tone that down a little bit. So needle in the butt almost seems a little funnier by comparison.
Fair enough.
Interesting, because I tracked down the original screenplay. This was written by, believe it or not, Chris Columbus, who'd famously go on to do stuff like Home Alone 2, Adventures in Babysitting, a lot of the John Hughes kind of stuff. This was sort of his breakout thing. This was a script he wrote as kind of a writing sample that got him a bunch of jobs, and he never thought it actually would be made. And if the movie is kind of creepy, the original script is an outright horror film. It is terrifying. The gremlins are not fun at all. They're these nasty monsters that just eat people. Gizmo turns into a gremlin with the rest of them. There is no Gizmo running around for the rest of the movie as a good guy. He's just as nasty. Nobody in it is very likable. Billy's mom is a pill-popping kind of drug addict who gets eaten by the gremlins and has her head rolled down the stairs. The dog gets eaten. Pete, the Corey Feldman character, gets eaten. It's pretty nasty.
Who did the treatment?
I don't know. I think they just worked with Columbus and had him soften it up as time went on. But just reading, I'm like, oh my God, I can't imagine anybody actually making this movie as it was written. And that's the funny thing, that they read it and went, oh, we should give this to Joe Dante. This would be perfect for him. And speaking of Joe Dante, this was really his big breakout movie. Before this, he had done Piranha, which was a lot of fun, The Howling, which is great. And then Spielberg selected him to make this film based on The Howling. And it took so long that while they were making it, he had a chance to direct a segment of Twilight Zone the movie while he was waiting to do that. And Dante is an amazing director. His movies have such a crazy tone of, oh, it's really scary, oh, it's really funny, and just bouncing back and forth. But his movies, once you start watching them, you really have to keep an eye out, because he just packs his movies with so much bizarre humor and in-jokes and crazy references and things. He's a huge Looney Tunes fan, and you can just see it watching any of his films. In fact, I almost feel like this movie is best summed up by that moment of Stripe peering up between an E.T. doll and a Bugs Bunny doll. You like mix E.T. and Bugs Bunny, and that's kind of your movie here.
Oh, E.T., Bugs Bunny, Feed the Kitty, Chuck Jones.
Who's actually in the movie.
Yes.
Obviously, It's a Wonderful Life. Apparently, he's a Capra fan, too, because he works in a bunch of references, not only that, to other Capra things as well. Lots of 50s and 60s sci-fi movies, which seems to be where he gets a lot of his casts. You have Dick Miller, who's in all of his movies. Kenneth Tobey. Usually he has Kevin McCarthy. He couldn't get him in this film, so he just has a clip from Invasion of the Body Snatchers there instead. And at the same time, he's also kind of paying homage to the executive producer, Steven Spielberg, by putting lots of little jokes and references to his stuff in there, too.
I don't have an answer to this, so I'm genuinely asking, but is this the first film that you can recall making these many callbacks, this many references to other things that are being tied into the themes of the film? It's
the first one I remember seeing. I know, like The Howling, for example, has tons of references to all these other werewolf movies hidden in it. But this is the first one I remember as a kid and slowly being aware of, oh, there's all this other stuff. And every time I see this movie, I notice something else. Just tonight, I noticed a Triffid in the background in the last scene in the department store.
But was Dante a kind of pioneer in this style?
I don't know. It feels like he's taking a lot of it from Looney Tunes that would do that sort of gag in the background of cartoons. I wish I could remember. There was another movie he was talking about when he made Gremlins 2 that specifically kept breaking the fourth wall and making those kind of references. I can't remember what the title was, though. But I think he's certainly the foremost in doing it, because all of his movies have this kind of stuff layered throughout them. I also love how that Looney Tunes sensibility starts to creep into the film, too. Like you have, when Stripe gets his head knocked against a cabinet, all of a sudden you hear the tweeting birds thing. That it really starts to feel like a live-action cartoon, and by the time you get to Gremlins 2, it really is a live-action cartoon. They just kind of take the rules away on that one. Also, everyone's talking about cinematic universes, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the Godzilla Cinematic Universe. Dante kind of has his own, because a lot of these movies sort of tie in. The reporter at the end of the movie on the TV is the same reporter from The Howling. If you look at Explorers, there's a scene where Dick Miller picks up a newspaper, and all of the news stories are references to other Dante movies. Like there's Kingston Falls Mystery Unsolved, Teacher Disappearance Unsolved from Twilight Zone the movie, Spa Arson Still Investigated from The Howling. Tons of them. So you start to think there's this one bizarre world that all this crazy stuff happens in. And there are a million clones of Dick Miller running around in it. Among the people they considered to direct this was Tim Burton, supposedly, based on some of his short films. But they were a little nervous because he hadn't directed a feature yet. I'm curious as to what a Tim Burton version of this would have been. I feel like it would have been a little more mean-spirited in a way.
It definitely would have been cynical. It wouldn't have had the same sort of heart.
And as we discussed, there's debate about this as a Christmas movie. What does everybody think? Is Gremlins a bona fide Christmas movie?
It's a Christmas movie. I know it was released in the summer, and that doesn't make sense to me. It's a Christmas movie.
Shana?
I agree. I think it's a Christmas movie. I mean, even at one point, they were talking about the reality of the holidays and the reality of Christmas. You know, is it all warm fuzzies and how different people process the holidays?
I just want somebody to listen, especially around the holidays.
Why is that?
That's when a lot of people get really depressed.
Oh. That's funny, because I always thought everyone was happy during the holidays. No matter what.
Well, most people are, but some aren't. While everybody else is opening up their presents, they're opening up their wrists.
Cheery thought.
It's true. The suicide rate's always the highest around the holidays.
Now I'm depressed.
And it was a real true moment. And it was two different perspectives. You know, one is the holidays are great. Even if my life isn't perfect, like this brings out the best in people. And then the other half is, well, my memories aren't as warm and fuzzy and I choose to be more realistic about it. And that's the reality of the holidays. So to me, yeah, this is a Christmas movie.
There's certain elements of Christmas now that are forever changed by this movie. I cannot hear Do You Hear What I Hear without thinking of this movie. There comes a point in the song where I just wait for the record player from when she shuts it off here. And same with Baby Please Come Home that opens the movie, the Darlene Love version. That is now forever the opening theme to Gremlins. That's it. As for Gremlins themselves, they have an interesting history in pop culture. Gremlins actually came from World War II with the British Royal Air Force. When they'd have malfunctions on planes, to keep up morale, they invented these ideas of, there's a little creature in there that's messing it up. And several pilots actually reported seeing and hearing things on their planes. There was one guy who actually said he heard voices of like, all right, ready, do it now. And it was just as an engine blew up. Now, a lot of people attribute this to their really high altitude. They're under the stress of combat. Hallucinations can happen, especially if the idea of creatures on the plane is already circulating around. Before this movie, probably the two biggest things that people knew Gremlins from were the Looney Tunes cartoon Falling Hair, where Bugs Bunny is fighting Gremlins, which Joe Dante really wanted to put at the beginning of the movie, but Warner Brothers wouldn't let him. And, of course, Twilight Zone, the Nightmare at 20,000 Feet TV episode, and the segment from Twilight Zone, the movie, with the gremlin on the wing of the plane. One thing with these creatures, though, I'm always curious about the fact that Gizmo multiplies and you get these mogwai, and one of them is kind of evil right from the start, and I'm always wondered, where does that evil come from? Is Stripe like some kind of weird dark side of Gizmo that never came out and is expressed once he reproduces? Because Gizmo's so sweet and nice, this is where all the meanness that might have been in Gizmo actually comes out?
Well, I think there's a mythology to the mogwai that we never get to learn. So I think there's a bigger story, and that it is a possibility that the mogwai himself, that Gizmo, is sort of a celestial creature of some sort who does contain multitudes, and one of those multitudes is a sort of pure evil. So Stripe is one of those multitudes.
I just wonder if any of the other mogwai would have turned out to be sweet and nice like Gizmo.
It's possible.
As soon as Stripe shows up, they're all kind of doing whatever he says. And most of them seem, even as mogwai, seem kind of nasty.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I know I was thinking in my mind is it was almost as if, and this is where for me the dichotomy comes in, is that Gizmo is the starting point. And even from the beginning is he said, there's responsibilities that go with this. And I feel like Gizmo is more of the reflection of if you do not meet your responsibilities, if you have poor choices, there are ramifications. And I feel as though the other mogwai, it's more of like the ramifications. If you don't do what you're supposed to do, if you don't follow the rules. And for me also, too, is I felt like there was a common theme throughout the movie is that everything was unfinished. Like with the inventions were unfinished. You were given responsibilities when you were given a mogwai. You didn't quite follow it. There's responsibilities and there's ramifications. And so I feel as though that the Gremlins were a representation of what happens when you don't follow the rules sometimes. There are ramifications.
We didn't even get into it. What do we think of the random rules? The stay out of light, don't get them wet, don't feed them after midnight.
I mean, stay out of light, okay. I mean, if they're photosensitive, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Don't get them wet, same. Whatever.
It opens up questions.
Maybe they're hydrophobic.
But then I'm like, can mogwai die of thirst? I mean...
What if they don't drink water? But don't feed them after midnight? Midnight, what time zone?
When does it reset? I mean,
When
is it like
when
noon?
does it stop being midnight somewhere?
Yeah.
Don't feed them ever.
I like the rules because it goes to when you're creating a new creature, you want to create a cool mythology. And to me, that immediately starts the mythology. And also, they're just so random and bizarre.
Well, this is also all fairy tale logic. You're set up with, okay, well, if you do it this way, I'm giving you the rules, you follow the rules, go on your path. We know already, because we know the rules, in order for the story to go forward, someone's going to have to transgress.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting about the water, because what water does is it makes them reproduce. And that is one of the meanings of water, one of the elements, and the meaning behind it. It's reproduction, it's fertility and reproduction. So I thought that was pretty cool. But how it takes that potentially negative aspect of what exactly are you reproducing, and then the eating after midnight. It's interesting how the common theme of like midnight, well, what's really behind midnight? And then I was thinking about like Cinderella and then midnight, and the transformation, because they were talking about metamorphosis, and I was thinking, I was like, well, that's pretty interesting, because we've seen that theme in other areas as well.
And midnight, for some reason, always has a weird kind of supernatural quality to it in so many other movies, that it's often a deadline for something. You have to do this by midnight or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the cusp of the new day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I couldn't link it to the witching hour, though, because that would have been closer to like, 3 a.m. But
Yeah.
I tried,
Yeah.
guys. I gave it a go. Couldn't make it, though.
I also feel like it also applies to getting a pet for the first time, and you get like the book and go, all right, here's all the things to do. Here's all the things you don't do. Don't feed your dog chocolate. Don't let them outside. The mogwai is just the same. It has a set of rules that come with it.
Yeah, I just feel as though this movie was, the cast was set up to fail. Here are the rules. I know you're going to fail, but I'm going to let you go through it so I can swoop in, tell you failed, you're not ready for this kind of responsibility, and I'm taking my pet back.
There is sort of that old horror trope of transgressions, and I
Yes.
feel like pretty much every character who really gets it from the Gremlins has transgressed in some way or another. Characters like Mrs. Deagle, who's absolutely evil and kind of pays for it. The science teacher does that horrible thing where he gives the mogwai the blood test, and that kind of turns the audience against him, too. I think at that point, we're okay with him, something bad happening to him.
I think we're also supposed to see those characters as archetypes. She, of course, is greed. She's avarice. And he's pretty much animal testing. So I think we're supposed to see them not as the actual characters they are, but more as symbols of something bigger.
That's a really good point.
But there's also that character who I can never remember the name of, the one with the plow.
Mr. Futterman.
Mr. Futterman.
Mm-hmm.
So Mr. Futterman is our nationalist,
Yep.
racist, and he's I think the one that rings very loudly as, I'm an archetype. Look at me. I'm an archetype.
He's more likable than the others just because he's Dick Miller. But
He's more likable because the actor is super likable, but he's punished for being a bigot.
And also I feel like kind of being stuck in the past. There's a sense this guy can't get past the glory days when things were great. He likes these comics that no longer exist. He has that giant Nixon poster on his house for re-electing him, which I think is really funny. Since Gremlins are always associated with technology, I feel like there's also a potential metaphor that that's what they represent here. You have this small town that almost feels like it could have been pulled from the 1940s or 50s, and we already see that technology, the stuff that Mr. Peltzer is making, doesn't work. And these Gremlins, we keep seeing them messing with machines in different ways and causing problems that way. I almost wonder if they're this sense of technology run amok and technology not working and not necessarily making life better for people.
In a way that puts the dad into context. The fact that he can't make anything work, but he's still going to keep trying, even though it's not working, and he knows it's not working. It's not a good thing that he's continuing to make these things that aren't working, I think is what I'm getting at.
There is the question of, with Mr. Futterman's whole thing against foreign technology, if maybe the Gremlins are supposed to represent that.
These goddamn foreign cars, they always freeze up on you. You don't find American machinery doing that. Our stuff can take anything. See that plow? 15 years old. Hasn't given me a day's trouble in 15 years. You know why? Kentucky Harvester. It ain't some farm piece of crap you pick up these days. That's a Kentucky Harvester.
The foreign technology problem in the United States in the 80s was giant. There was an influx of electronics that were less expensive than they would have been if they'd been made in the U.S. So it was putting factories out of business. So it was a thorn in the side of U.S. manufacturing. And I don't actually know, but this still might be today. But it was a big deal. And I can understand why that would have been a big deal for him. I don't want to necessarily call out a certain politician, but...
You can come on, go ahead. It's fine.
But we know he would have supported that certain politician fully.
Yeah, unfortunately, probably. I do love the touch that his wife kind of keeps poo-pooing when he says that. He's like, oh, the damn foreign TVs. And his wife's like, oh, now. You get the sense that's a conversation they've had many times where she doesn't approve of it. This one is, I'll admit, a little bit more of a stretch. The idea of Gremlins as sort of chaos caused by or some kind of response to unbridled capitalism. That the dad has this thing of as soon as he sees that the mogwai are multiplying, he's like, ooh, this could be a big thing. We could make money off this. This could be the big one. Pets that everybody wants. We can make money. And of course, we see again Miss Deagle, who is like capitalism personified,
right,
who pays for it as well.
Well, it's the 80s. It's getting right into the heart of Reaganomics, I think, at this point. So, yes.
A portion of that I think is a little muted in the movie because they cut some scenes out is the Judge Reinhold character, Gerald, who has that whole speech about how he's going to be a millionaire and how he's tough and he's ready to deal with this world. And what's missing from the film, it was cut out, but it's been put back in some TV versions, is that when Kate and Billy are in the bank, they open the vault and there's Judge Reinhold, insane, who's now like, I'm the president of the bank now. I'm going to run things. And they just close the vault door and I'm like, we'll come back for him later. He's gone. And I kind of miss that scene because it's really funny and Judge Reinhold's hilarious in it. And I think it would have presented that idea of this kind of mindset is going to get you in trouble. The Gremlins are that trouble incarnate. There's also this sense of the Gremlins as sort of the modern world invading this old small town, this older style of thinking. The fact that Stripe comes out with a mohawk, the first thing I think of is the punk scene.
Oh, yeah.
And this idea of the kind of anarchistic punk ethos.
The youth.
Yep.
The youth are invading. They're dumb. They're following these scary-looking, chains-wearing, ear-pierced punks.
They're out to cause trouble. They have no respect for anything. They have no respect for property. Yeah.
No one can tell them where to roam, man.
The novelization for this movie is kind of notorious for all the weird stuff it adds to it. And you're going to love this because the novelization presents the idea that the mogwai are aliens.
I absolutely think they are aliens. I think we get hints of it through the entire movie. We have the marquees, look to the skies. What was the other
A Boy's Life and Watch the Skies.
A Boy's Life and Watch the Skies. There's the Trifid. There's all of the 50s Space Invaders movies.
Robbie the Robot from Forbidden Planet,
robots.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Yep. You have Kenneth Tobey from The Thing from Another World.
Right. And there's subtle references because if you're a casual viewer, you're not going to pick up on any of this. But it's not a loss for you. You're still going to really enjoy the film. It doesn't really matter. But if you want to dig a little deeper and you recognize all of these, yes, they are absolutely alien.
If you can find the novelization on eBay, it's by a guy named George Gipe. It's kind of fascinating for the mythos that he invents, which none of it was approved by the filmmakers. He just kind of went and did it. That the mogwai were genetically engineered by an inventor called Mogturman from the planet Enz, and they were sent to all these planets to be ambassadors, but the genetics kind of went wrong and they became gremlins after the rules are broken.
I disagree with this mythology, but they're still absolutely aliens.
The book has whole dialogue scenes between Gizmo and Stripe where they're talking to each other and Stripe is threatening him and stuff. There's this weird idea that there's a caste system where you have the original mogwai that were peace-loving and intelligent and long-lived, Gizmo, and that if they reproduce, they create these other ones that are more short-lived and aggressive, like Stripe and the other mogwai, and that the mogwai can't harm each other. They're prevented from like killing each other genetically, which I'm glad they never bring that up in the movie. There's some weird stuff. It's kind of a fascinating book, but definitely some of the mythology doesn't quite work.
They're still aliens. Just I don't want to say don't read the book because that's mean. If you can find it, read it if you feel like it. But wow.
I love that we don't know, that we're never told. I know a lot of people assume there's some kind of Chinese creature or something, but
I don't think so. There's nothing besides that the what was his name?
Mr. Wing. We never find out his name in the movie, but yeah.
There's nothing besides Mr. Wing having the mogwai to indicate to me that Gizmo is a Chinese animal.
And it's notable that mogwai is a Chinese word for
it
monster
is?
or demon.
Okay, I guess I have to take that back because I didn't know that.
Not necessarily. That was something in the original script where
Okay.
Mr. Wing was actually a really horrible guy who intentionally gives this to Peltzer knowing it's going to cause problems for him.
Okay, so he could have just seen it and decided to call it Monster.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Gremlins themselves were created by Chris Walas, who we've discussed in a previous episode on The Fly, the movie he won the Oscar for. And, oh man, I can't imagine the work he had cut out for him in trying to create all these different creatures. And we see in some shots, there's a ton of gremlins they had to make. Figure out how to puppeteer them. They had massive problems trying to figure out how to make Gizmo work. Every time you see Gizmo, it's usually a different puppet and kind of a different method. Like anytime you see a close-up of him emoting, that's actually like a 2-foot-long giant Gizmo head that they're puppeteering. And there are shots where they had to have multiple ones in the same scene. That moment where Billy accidentally knocks Gizmo off the desk and has to take him to the bathroom to bandage him up, when he's walking with him into the room, that's one puppet. And then you can see that he kind of puts him down in the sink out of frame and the
Yes.
camera tilts down. That's another puppet that was already sitting there ready to be puppeteered.
That explains why that shot looks so weird, and it's always looked so strange to me.
You can see that Gizmo kind of jumps. As soon as he puts him down, all of a sudden his ear pops up and he's a little further over. That's why. But there's a lot of stuff like that all over the movie. And Gizmo proved a huge problem because Gizmo was supposed to turn into a gremlin until Steven Spielberg decided he's too cute. You cannot get rid of this character. You've got to keep him around. Very wise decision.
Good call.
Really good call. I think even if they didn't intend for this to stay any sort of kids movie, the audience needed a good guy to cling to. They definitely did.
With Gizmo being so cute, if you turned him into a monster, I think the audience just would have turned on this movie. There would have been no way to
I
stick
agree
with it.
with that.
The problem is, though, they hadn't planned for Gizmo to be able to do all the stuff he has to in the second half of the movie, so they had to keep figuring out ways to use the puppets they had in creative ways. Like that scene where Gizmo is hiding in the motorcycle helmet as the gremlins are hatching. They're like, well, all right, what can we do? We don't have a bottom half of this puppet. All right, stick him in here. Putting him in the knapsack for the second half of the movie. That was an easy fix because it's like, all right, we can just have him poking out of the top there. But they really had to scramble to make him work, and the puppeteers were so frustrated, they requested that scene where Gizmo is tied to the dartboard and the gremlins are flinging darts at him because they just need to get their aggression out.
Can we just throw darts at him?
Just a little bit. On the other side, I love Stripe. I know he's the bad guy, but there's something so fun about this character that he's just so into being a troublemaker. At the same time, his wants are so simple when he's just like, I need candy. Oh, there's candy across the street. I'm going to go get candy. That shot of him in the movie theater when everyone's having fun, and he has this big shit-eating grin on his face like, oh, look at what I've done. I've created all these guys, and we're having a good time. Isn't this great? I kind of feel for him in a way. That moment of rage when he sees the theaters exploding, it's like, my brethren, no! So let's talk about some of the characters, the human characters. First of all, Billy Peltzer. This is a character that, for me, shouldn't work, but actually does. Because if you look at him at least on the page, Billy's not very dynamic.
He's flat.
He's very reactive. I mean, he's mostly just something happens and he has to react to it.
And I'm okay with that. There are some movies where you just need your lead to bring the audience through the action. And I feel like that's what Billy does for us.
And I feel like he's kind of the straight man to the rest of the movie. Even the other human characters, like even Hoyt Axton gets to play a little big. Frances McCain, who's playing the mother, she has a lot of really great little subtle comedy bits. But Zach Galligan has to play it straight and play this very straight-laced, nice guy. And yet he makes it work for me. I like this character. I really like him. It's kind of like George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life, but without the self-pity.
George was an asshole. I think we've established this.
At the same time, I feel like Galligan hints at this little quiet frustration in Billy. When Gerald has that whole speech about how you're practically supporting your whole family, there's this look in his face of just like, ugh. And yet he doesn't blow his top or anything like that. He just kind of lets it roll off his back. And the original script had this whole subplot where he becomes like, basically sees himself as this mythic hero like King Arthur, and he buys a replica sword and starts running around hacking the gremlins with it, which is why they have that decorative sword that he starts running around with for the rest of the movie. And I'm glad they pulled that back, because in the original script, Billy's kind of an asshole too. It's hard to like him.
Jeez.
But I also want to point out that you'd think the normal arc would be Billy screws up, and causes all this horrible stuff to happen and learns his lesson. But as a mogwai owner, he's not that bad. It's really not his fault in most of the cases.
It's accidental, and then it's sabotage.
And the accident wasn't even caused by him. It's caused by Pete.
Right.
Can I hold him?
Sure. I don't see why not. He seems to like you. Great. Thanks a lot.
Sorry. Who's in that jar?
Nothing, just water.
I think this comes down to no matter what you do right, something can happen. Life gets in the way. Something happens that isn't your fault and just screws everything up.
Mm-hmm. Galligan was supposedly partially cast because he just had great chemistry with Phoebe Cates, who he said he kind of developed a crush on during filming. But among those considered was Judd Nelson, who supposedly gave an audition that was very angry. Like at one point he grabbed an ashtray and threw it across the room, thinking that was going to impress the casting directors. And Emilio Estevez, who Spielberg shot down because he looked at the audition and went, "Look at him, he's internalizing. We can't have that." And so he didn't get the part. I don't know if I could picture either of them really doing it anyway.
No.
And then we have Kate, played by Phoebe Cates, who is kind of almost introverted. She's very withdrawn, which might be kind of a reaction to the trauma that we've heard that she's experienced. And yet at the same time, we see that she's also very nice. She treats Mr. Futterman with kid gloves. She's running around with that petition to try and save Dory's Pub, and she volunteers to work there for no money. She's really kind-hearted, but kind of removed.
She also tries to light cigarettes of the Gremlins, so maybe a little too kind.
Yeah.
See, she understands they're having fun and sympathizes and wants to help out. Hey, come on, I've seen...
Maybe some enabling.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I've seen nights at bars that are not as bad as the Gremlins at Dory's. Phoebe Cates being cast was a bit controversial because she was coming off of Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and the producers were afraid she couldn't play the girl next door type, but I think she does a great job. Now, as for the dad, Rand Peltzer, played by Hoyt Axton, interesting that for the guy who kind of sets the whole plot in motion, he's absent for so much of the movie.
He is. It made me wonder why he's our narrator, because he doesn't see pretty much all of what happens.
Friends, let me introduce myself. Peltzer's the name, Rand Peltzer. That's me there on the corner. I'm an inventor, and I have a story to tell. Yeah, I know. Who hadn't got a story? Well, nobody's got a story like this one. Nobody.
Unless if we take a step back from the film and just kind of imagine this entire story is something that he wove and he's telling to somebody to buy one of his contraptions.
That's an interesting interpretation. But if he told me this story, I wouldn't buy it. Goddamn thing.
I know. It's like the Mad Max thing where it's like the narrator is this kid who couldn't have known half of what they've been talking about this whole time. So you have to come up with a reason for how this story is being told.
I was thinking of his reaction when he's watching the news report and they're like, stories of little green men, and they're skeptical, and Ren has this look on his face like, they don't know the truth. It's like, well, you don't know the truth. You saw one gremlin. What do you know? They almost cast Pat Hingle from the Batman movies, Commissioner Gordon. They had to turn him down because his audition was too good. Apparently he played Rand as sort of this failed inventor who feels like he's nearing the end of his run and he can't get anything right, and it was so good they were afraid it was going to overwhelm the movie.
That's a shame.
It is. I'm curious as to how he would have done it, but I can actually follow that logic, especially if Rand is just going to disappear for a lot of the story. It's probably best not to have him in there. Now we move to one of my favorite characters, the mom, Lynne Peltzer. Oh my God, Lynne Peltzer is awesome. Frances Lee McCain might seem familiar playing a lot of other movie mothers. She was in Back to the Future. She was Leah Thompson's mom, and the mother in Footloose as well, and Stand By Me. The performance of Frances Lee McCain, there's a lot of really amazing stuff. If you watch the scene where Rand comes home and he's talking about how he might have interested somebody in the bathroom buddy, and she gives him this big smile, and as soon as he's not looking, she looks at Billy like, oh, here we go again. Or when he first brings out the wrapped box, and it's clear there's an animal in it, you can see this look on her face like, oh, no, not another animal. Or any of the scenes where her husband's inventions are failing and she has to cover for him.
Hello? Hello? Hi, honey. No,
No, I'm sure it works fine. I was just out in the back porch for a second.
You get this whole backstory of her marrying this dreamer where she's kind of the more practical and pragmatic one and has to cover up where his dreams are falling short and his inventions aren't working.
Yeah, I always wondered how that was really going to work because there was that one scene where she used the coffee machine and then sludge comes out of it. And so she lets it go into the cup. She passes it to him and she says, I'm not sure if this is drinkable. I don't even know if he drank it. It's his own invention, but she gave it a try.
And he has that great follow-up line of jokingly, what's wrong with this? So you almost get the sense this is a running joke between the two of them when his stuff doesn't work. And yet she's willing to do things like, when he has to dim the lights, instead of just reaching over and turning off the light, she picks up the remote, extends the antenna, clicks the button, puts it back. Even though it wastes so much time, she's still willing to do it in front of him to make it seem like these inventions are really great and useful.
The committed housewife.
We discussed Mrs. Deagle a little bit.
Can I ask a silly question? Did anybody else get from Mrs. Deagle the thought of or a reminder of the Wicked Witch from
absolutely.
Yeah.
There was so many common themes there about I'm going to get you and your dog too.
I want your dog.
Barney?
Give him to me. I'll take him to the kennel. They'll put him to sleep. It'll be quick and painless compared to what I could do to him.
What could you do?
I'll catch the beast myself. Then he'll get what he deserves. A slow, painful death.
And then at the end is when she flew out the window and she was upside down. I had that vision of the house falling down and the feet shriveling up. And I was like, ooh.
The other thing I keep thinking of is Mr. Potter from It's a Wonderful Life. I mean, her aims are pretty much what Mr. Potter's are. Foreclosing a bunch of people, make a bunch of money. And where that movie never gave us a comeuppance for him, this movie is all too happy to, which is kind of the Gremlins doing a little bit of public service. A couple little details I love about her character. Do you notice that all of her cats are named after forms of currency?
Yes.
No, I didn't.
Dollar bill.
Drachma, kopeck.
Yep.
Kind of says it all right there. And the picture of her husband that they keep showing is actually an actor, Edward Arnold, who was the villain in a lot of Frank Capra movies, like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and Meet John Doe. They actually contacted his family to get permission to use it, just as a nice little joke. But it also led to them having to cut some scenes, because originally when the Gremlins show up as carolers, there was this whole bit where she's talking to the framed photo, and she came across as so kind of sad and tragic and sympathetic. They had to cut it to make sure that people wouldn't feel sympathy for her when she flies out the window a minute later. She has a really interesting line there. When she first sees the Gremlins, she's like, they're here, they've come for me. Almost like she thinks that finally karma has caught up with her, that she always expected something bad was going to happen for all the stuff she's done, and this is it. This is the moment where it happens. All right, this is probably a good time to bring up another issue with the movie. There's been a lot of interpretations of the film saying it's a racist movie. Patricia Turner's book, Ceramic Uncles and Celluloid Mammies, posits that the Gremlins are basically African-American stereotypes. That the fact that they wear newsboys caps, which I guess was a thing for African-American youth at the time, that they're eating fried chicken, that they wear sunglasses at night and breakdance and listen to blues, suggests that they're supposed to stand in for black youth kind of moving into the suburbs and causing trouble. What do we think of this idea?
Now that it's pointed out to me, I'm horrified, and I totally agree.
I don't know if I totally agree with it, honestly.
No, I totally agree.
The thing is, a lot of the things that they point out specifically have production reasons for why they did them. Putting clothes on them and putting those hats was just something they came up with in the middle of shooting to hide some of the puppeteering rods and things like that.
Right, but there are lots of other hats.
They're wearing a lot of different hats in the movie, too. They have that silly one with the flaps that my uncle used to have as well.
What I will say is, I don't have the expertise to say yes or no. I'm going to defer to somebody who has more expertise.
You know, for me, it's interesting how you point out specific dress, specific ways of holding themselves. What I kind of got out of the movie is a quick representation of many types of individuals. Like, one of the things that really impressed me is that they quickly adopted some of our customs. I mean, they were dressed up and they were caroling. I mean, how long have they even been alive in order to even get that custom down to even, do that? They started quickly speaking. Even though the vocabulary wasn't expansive, they were speaking. There was one that was a cross-dresser sitting at a table with lipstick. I mean, I think the representation was throughout. So for me, and it may be my view, is I didn't see like one specifically pinpointed. You know, being older and now looking at it and now seeing like the darker moments, and I wouldn't say that would necessarily represent a certain population. And in that case, I would be horrified if that's what it was intended to be.
Yeah, I don't think it was intended that way. I do think it definitely does have a race problem in another way, in a way that a lot of films from that era did, of just lack of representation. I mean, let's face it, the main Asian character we have is kind of the mystic Eastern stereotype. And even though actor Key Luke plays it really well and he's great, you can't really get away from that. Meanwhile, the only African-American character we have on screen fills that stereotype of he's the first guy to die.
Yeah. Which I know we've talked about this, and actually people have studied this, that it's a fallacy that the black person is the first person to die in horror films.
I wonder if this kind of helped cement that as an idea.
I don't want to say for certain because I don't have the data in front of me right now, but I know several people have looked at the data, and that's not really true.
Yeah, certainly though, black characters do not survive horror movies very much.
But not first,
yeah,
is what I mean. But absolutely, I think what it comes down to is that the survival rate is very low, but first is not necessarily true.
Yeah. It doesn't help that Kingston Falls feels very, very white. And
it feels extraordinarily white.
It's a shame they cut a scene where Stripe is making fun of some Christmas carolers, and it's almost a pity they cut it just for the fact that it would have tripled the number of speaking parts for African-American people, because there's 2 black people among the carolers. And it at least would have helped this idea that, yes, there are black people living in Kingston Falls besides this one guy. But that's definitely an issue that you see in a lot of these Amblin movies, that I think it's just was a blind spot for a lot of these directors, unfortunately, that it never occurred to them that you have a movie with all these white kids running around and white characters, and there's no black kids, there's very rarely an Asian kid, and if they are, they're closer to like Short Round or Data from Goonies, you know? Let's move on to something more pleasant, the music score by Jerry Goldsmith.
His scores are just always amazing.
And this was really the flowering of his great relationship with Joe Dante. Goldsmith had scored all of Twilight Zone, the movie, and because of all the horrible behind-the-scenes stuff with that film, there wasn't really too much supervision in post-production by some of the other directors who were involved. But Joe Dante worked really closely with Goldsmith, and they became buddies. And from then on, Goldsmith scored pretty much most of his films while he was alive. We're all the way up to Goldsmith's last film, Looney Tunes Back in Action. With this one, though, it's so much fun. Goldsmith was big into electronics in his scores, and it's a nice mix of traditional instrumentation and synthesizers and electronics, too. You get the violins, which remind me a lot of his Twilight Zone, the movie work, and then you have the weird kind of synthesized quality to the gremlin rag, which almost makes it sound like some kind of weird guttural creature noise or something.
And you can hear how other musicians, other composers were influenced by him, specifically Danny Elfman. You can hear a lot of what would become Beetlejuice out of this film specifically.
Yeah, Elfman's use of violins that way, definitely.
Right, yeah.
I also love that, like John Williams, he has kind of the leitmotif thing going on of different themes for different characters. Gizmo has his really sweet, nice theme. Mrs. Deagle has that wonderfully kind of comedic one that whenever she's walking down the street. The bucolic Kingston Falls theme. But the Gremlin one is, it's so catchy. And it's funny, it's the kind of thing where if you played it out on a piano, it wouldn't sound very impressive because it's so much of it sounds like one single note. But once you hear it orchestrated, it's fantastic. I'm not going to get too far into the deleted scenes, but there is one thing that the ending was changed. Notice that when Gizmo pulls the ring on the window shade, only one of them goes up, and all of a sudden you can see Billy running over. Originally, Gizmo was going to pull one, and then Billy was going to pull the other, and that was going to be the one that really hit Stripe and killed him. But Spielberg decided, no, Gizmo has to be the hero.
Yeah.
So he took that away from Billy.
His character, he puts the audience in his backpack. He guides us around less than participates in all the action, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So it makes more sense that Gizmo confronts his darker side, basically, than it does for Billy.
Kind of goes with that line, I brought you into this life, I can take you out.
Exactly, yeah.
And the idea that humans have caused this mess, it's Gizmo's responsibility to fix it. He's going to be the one who takes care of it.
I like that, yep.
Okay, a bit of trivia for the film. This is the first appearance of the emblem logo on screen.
Oh.
This is the first one.
I didn't know that.
Also, this is the first time in a long time people saw the classic Warner Brothers logo with the shield and the fanfare. For a while, it was that weird kind of Saul Bass designed one with the 3 dots.
Yeah, that one was very strange.
Yeah, I didn't like it. I prefer the old one, and it's stuck around ever since. So we can thank Joe Dante for insisting on that one. If the main Kingston Falls Square looks familiar, it's because it's the very same backlot set used for Hill Valley in the first 2 Back to the Future movies. In fact, the theater that Billy and Kate blow up is the same one that the DeLorean crashes into at the end of Back to the Future when it finally makes it back to 1985. That set's been in so many things, though. If you look at the very first Twilight Zone episode, Where Is Everybody?, you can see the courthouse in that, too. Just tons of stuff. Joe Dante stuck a copy of his father's book, The 4 Magic Moves to Winning Golf, on Billy's bedside table, but got a little flack from his dad that it wasn't actually not close enough for you to read the title.
You didn't do good enough.
And the chainsaw fight was actually devised on the set by Zach Galligan and Joe Dante. A lot of the stuff in this movie feels like they were just kind of winging it. And they just came up with that kind of as an homage to Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
I was going to ask if that's what it was from. Yep. That's amazing.
And that led to the idea of, Kate will go and find the lights and have a chance to save Billy. So that whole thing pretty much came up from them just goofing off on the set.
Very cool.
For the legacy of the film, as we mentioned, along with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, the violence of this film helped inspire the creation of the PG-13 rating. Spielberg was one of the big proponents of that because back then it was either PG or R, no middle ground. So you have a lot of movies that are PG that are like, ooh, that could have been an R,
Yep.
and vice versa.
I have seen so many PG movies that I never should have seen. They should have been an R. But my mom just let us watch it anyway.
And I love the PG-13 rating because it's said to me that, ooh, it's a little scary or violent enough to make it exciting, but also I can get into it without an adult. Excellent. And my youth is filled with great PG-13 movies as a result. This movie was also the vanguard of a whole series of little creature movies. You had Ghoulies, Critters, Troll. A couple of these Critters and Ghoulies were actually supposedly in production before this was released, so they claimed that that was just coincidental. But I don't know. I feel like the Gremlins script was kicking around for so long, there's a good chance they got some influence there. There was another one, Munchies, that was pretty terrible too, I seem to remember.
Yes, terrible.
Directed by the editor of this movie.
What?
There's, of course, tons of video games and toys. I remember having the life-size Gizmo that I got that Christmas, too. Just tons of stuff. I think they made an Atari 2600 game that never really got a wide release, unfortunately. But, man, that Christmas, Gizmo was everywhere. Every window had a big, stuffed, fuzzy Gizmo. And, of course, the sequel, which divided a lot of people. I love the sequel. Supposedly, for years, they were trying to get part 2 made, and they just couldn't get it off the ground. They were trying to do it without Joe Dante's involvement. And eventually, they turned to him and goes, here, please do a sequel. You can do whatever you want. So he gave them the sequel, all right. He was like, you asked for it, you got it. And basically set out to make fun of the first film as much as possible with the sequel. One other notable thing in the legacy is the Furby.
Oh my goodness.
Oh,
yes.
Furby.
Yes, Furbies.
That clearly were very mogwai looking. Allegedly, Warner Brothers actually considered suing Hasbro over the design of the Furby because they said it infringed on the mogwai design. And there was eventually a settlement, and Hasbro released the special Gizmo Furby as a result of that. Okay, we come to the big questions. What's everybody's favorite scene?
Okay, so my favorite scene is more of a favorite 5-second sequence. Billy's making orange juice, as one does in the morning when you have a giant contraption that makes orange juice, and it's also an orange holder. He puts one orange on the top of this orange pulper and juicer. Things seem to be going well. Juice is starting to come out. And then the whole thing just kind of explodes and covers the entire kitchen in pulp and juice that seems to have come from a dozen oranges. So, yes, it does juice and it pulps, but it also multiplies. It's a miracle.
I also feel like it's sort of foreshadowing the gremlin in the blender.
Yes, yeah. So that's my favorite scene, that, and it looks like the actor, he just can't keep a straight face. He's losing it right into his arm.
And I think it actually works for character. Like
it does.
He has this moment of, oh, maybe it'll work, and as it goes on, like, no, of course it's not going to work. Terrific.
Yeah. Just love it. And it's pretty much a 5-second scene.
Shana?
So for me, I think my favorite scene after all of the chaos and the anarchy, the saddest and my favorite part was the end where Mr. Wing came in. When he first came in, I got sad. I was like, wah, wah. And then when he explained the rationale of needing to take Gizmo back and just seeing the connection that they had together and just listening to them talk to each other. And it was like they had a connection that Gizmo and Billy didn't have.
Only van Kuila? Hola, 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 hola. Your scarf. I warned you. With mogwai comes much responsibility. But you didn't listen, and you see what happens.
I didn't mean it.
You do with mogwai what your society has done with all of nature's gifts. You do not understand. You are not ready.
I think also, too, for me, it was kind of like, okay, well, the chaos kind of stopped. We were able to, like, take care of everything, but who knows if more water enters into it? Are we going to start all over again? And when Mr. Wing just kind of, like, steps in and he's like, no, I'm taking Gizmo back. And it's kind of like, okay, peace has really been restored at that point for me. And just seeing that special connection between the two of them. And I just felt as though that was something that was just kind of missing and kind of entered into the movie. And it was a really sweet moment for me. So that was my favorite part.
One thing I think it's really sweet, Howie Mandel, who did the voice of Gizmo, says that as he's walking away across the front lawn away from the house, you can hear Gizmo talking, and what he's doing is he's relating the events of the story to Mr. Wing and telling him everything that happened. Because you can hear him basically describing every little beat.
Oh, wow. That's adorable. It's like he had summer camp.
For me, it's no contest the kitchen scene. I love that. First of all, because it has the big first reveal of the gremlin when Lynne is around the corner and we pull back and see it munching on one of the gingerbread cookies, and it just hears her and does that amazing snarl. I remember just a cheer going through the audience the first time I saw this, when you first saw this thing. And then from then on, I mean, you have the blender, you have the microwave, you have Lynne stabbing the shit out of that one on the counter, and just like... Oh, she's just so awesome in that scene. Hearing the descriptions of everything that happened in it before I saw it just made it seem so just big and epic. And when I finally did see it, it actually did live up to that. Okay, recommendations. If somebody likes this, what other movies would you recommend?
I recommend, if you're looking for a Christmas movie that also has a horror element, Krampus. Don't look it up if you don't know it. Just get it, watch it. You're welcome. Don't let your kids watch it. You watch it, enjoy it. Also, Big Trouble in Little China. It has a lot of the same problems that Gremlins does when it comes to Orientalism, where a white person has come into Chinatown and acts like it is their territory and they can usurp part or all of it, and no. So, yeah, definitely watch it.
All right, I'm going to go with two. One is Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. Not the Guillermo del Toro produced remake, but the original TV movie from the 70s. For me, it's kind of the beginning of the Little Creatures movies, with Kim Darby as a woman who, with her husband, moves into this house and is told, don't remove this grate from the basement. And of course, the grate gets removed, and these three nasty little creatures come out and start terrorizing her. They have a lot of similarities to the Gremlins. They don't like bright lights, and there is a scene where, just like Kate, she's running around with a camera using the flashes to drive them away. But despite the low budget and how dated it is, it's still a really creepy damn movie. The other one is another Joe Dante movie that kind of mixes comedy and horror, although a little bit more on the comedy side in this case, The Burbs with Tom Hanks, about a group of suburbanites who start to suspect that their neighbors might be serial killers. It also has Corey Feldman again in a really funny role in that one. But it has that amazing same tone of, oh, this is really funny, this is really funny. Now we're going to tell this story of a real murder that's really creepy, and now all this really creepy stuff is going to happen. It has a lot of the same collaborators. You have Dick Miller back again in a cameo, Jerry Goldsmith doing the music. It's just really fun, great stuff. Okay, anything else to say about Gremlins?
Love it.
Always love it. Okay, that ends the discussion, but not the conversation. If you'd like to have your say about Gremlins or feel that we missed something, check out the comment section for this episode on www.cinemaspection.com and start talking. You can also like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter at CinemaSpection. For our personal accounts, I'm at TimosaurusR.
At With Sharp Things.
Our show is available on both iTunes and Stitcher, so if you like what you hear, please subscribe, and if you have a moment, please leave us a review there. We appreciate your feedback, and your reviews help increase our visibility. We'll be back to discuss another movie next time. Until then, thanks for listening, and remember to keep watching closely. There's more to a movie than what's on the screen. We'll be back to discussing them. Damn it, I was so close. We'll be back to I'm dried out. It's the thing. My mouth is all dried out. No, I'm going to grab it in a second. We'll be back to yeah, I need it. Narration caca.
Yum, yum.
Yum, yum. Oh, I love Stripe.
Do it in Stripe voice.
See, Stripe voice I can do. I can't do Gizmo voice. He doesn't have enough grammar to do it.
Mogwai.
That's pretty good. Damn.